Hello, this is Elsa, and today I am delighted to have with me Laura Knight-Jadczyk, who has been on a quest for truth, I would think almost all her life, and it's been an incredibly interesting journey. I particularly wanted to interview her for two reasons. One, she has also been interested in someone whose work I incredibly admire. The work is called Political Panorology, and she has written a foreword to it. But more than that, she has really looked everywhere for truth herself and has been willing to face that evil plays a role. And then she's looked at what is reality. But I do not want to start there because I am really interested as well in who is the person. Who is this person, this little girl once long ago, Laura? And did she have the seeds of the woman? Was she already questioning? Yes, she was conventional, but was she not an average conventional, accepting things person? So I'd love to start with you as a child and then your journey and how you found things and what you found, all of that. So it's all yours, Laura.
Oh, well, you mean I don't get a specific question to respond to?
Well, it is specific. Who are you?
I like to think of myself as just an ordinary person who dreams of a better world and wants to understand why this one isn't better, because I have the idea that if you understand why something is the way it is, then you can figure out how to fix it. You can't fix something you don't understand. So therefore, I would like it to be a better world. I would like to be instrumental in helping to make it a better world. Uh, Therefore, I want to understand why it is the way it is. Why are we the way we are? Why is Earth the way it is? Do we have meaning in life? All the basic questions that great philosophers and ordinary people have asked, for millennia. Why is it the way it is? And if it's not acceptable, can we fix it? So that's.
Were you asking those questions as a little girl, even looking around you?
Uh, I think I was. I think I was a retarded child. I swear. Sometimes I think I really. I mean, I was intellectually very, very bright. I read at a very early age, and I was in advanced classes throughout, my school years and all that sort of thing. But in another sense, I was really retarded. And probably because I lived in this intellectual world. I preferred the world of books, and I lived in the world of books almost exclusively for a long, long time, and I still, retreat into the realm of books because that's where I do my research. That's where I extract the information. But of course, now I go into it with questions. Then I went into it, well, actually, with curiosity, just general curiosity. And the things that I read most when I was growing up were histories, historical novels, or actual historical volumes about history, historical periods, anything like that. I very much enjoyed. I liked reading old diaries. And they had a number of old diaries, like from the French Revolution or from the American Revolution, that sort of thing. I would read those, and I would try to get inside the heads of the people who were writing them, because, of course, they were writing about things that were to us now, from a perspective, were dramatic, but they were living in them at the time, and to them it was just what was happening around them. And then, of course, if you transpose that to today, we are all living in this time, and it seems like it's just what's happening, but who knows if 100 or 200 years from now it might be considered some dramatic turning point in history, and somebody would very much like to read somebody's diary about the daily events. So yeah, that's what but socially I was retarded, because I didn't my family was a little peculiar. Yeah.
In what way?
Well, my grandfather was an engineer, and he raised me and my brother mostly. And he worked from an office in the house, And then he would travel to where the jobs were and, work there because he was a mechanical engineer and he specialized in marine engineering. And it was a requirement for us to be very quiet when he was working because his nerves were not good, and his nerves were not good because of World War One. I only found out later, but that's what it was. And so we had to be very quiet, and we learned to be very quiet. And so we were very quiet. We weren't loud. We weren't raucous. My brother and I both were readers, and my grandfather didn't, his nerves didn't accommodate social life, so to say. He wasn't a social person. He himself was a person who lived in his head. So maybe you could say he was, nowadays they would say a little bit autistic, but I would just say that he was driven and focused on his work and very creative in that way. So it was just kind of a strange household because we had to be quiet and we weren't sociable. That was it. So,
But I can see it gave you a fantastic foundation for your intellectual interests, for the passion for history, the passion for people, for questioning, because I listened to a very long interview with you, over 2 hours, and I was struck by how you kept questioning and going further. How you early on got married, had 4 children, and then had a bedridden time. And during that time, you were anything but helpless in your brain. You were questioning. And from that interview, I also learned that you had grown up traditionally Christian, very a conventional person. So there was nothing in your early environment to make you question that outlook. But already, as far as you could question, as far as you could learn things, you were doing it. And this has been a hallmark. And in fact, I have noticed this among some truth tellers, this curiosity, this questioning, this daring to go outside a limit for whatever reason. And in your case, you were already, in many ways, outsider. You were not somebody who had to learn, oh my God, I'll get kicked out of the herd if I do this, it seems.
Yeah, I was definitely not part of the herd, and that continued because I had I had particular tastes already by the time I was, say, 7 or 8 years old. I liked to read. I liked certain kinds of music. When music was played in our house, it was low. It was classical. It was nothing raucous, nothing nerve jangling, and I just, and my grandfather himself was a very strong character, and he would say things that, would impress me. He didn't think much of what he called progress. Progress was a bad word, because when they came in and progress, it always meant destruction of something. Because, I grew up in Florida, and progress meant, building hotels on the beach, destroying the wetlands, building these vast estates, so little cardboard box houses, and getting rid of the natural beauty of things, killing everything right and left. And so he didn't think much of progress. And yet at the same time, he was a mechanical engineer. So obviously he was building progressive ships. So, it was kind of a dichotomy in a lot of ways. So I didn't go with the herd at all because, the herd was all about going with the progress, the modern things. I got this distaste for modern things, you could say. And so when the kids were all going wild over rock and roll music when I was in high school, I'm listening to Bach and Beethoven. And I'm thinking, I did later acquire quite an affection for what they now call classic rock. But at the time it was the music of the kids, but that was only later after high school, and I would listen to it. And I would listen to it and I would say, well, there's something actually melodic about that. It takes talent to produce that, and I would kind of get inside it, and so I got an appreciation for classic rock, and I'll listen to classic rock, and I'll listen to 50s music, but, Mostly it's classical.
I'd love to hear how your thinking progressed and also your reaching out and your writing, because it's been incredibly interesting. It's also interesting to me that you haven't stayed a private person. Like some people like you might have just done thinking and, on their own, written journals, and it didn't go anywhere. But you're somewhere all along. You've reached out to the world. And considering the situation we have right now, my belief is that we need people who reach out into the world in various ways, that we don't keep our insights to ourselves. So I'd love to hear your journey. It started out Christian. It didn't stay there. You expanded both your idea of what the universe was like, and then I would say it's the biggest four-letter word, evil.
Yeah, well, it started out really, I had some experiences as a child that really frightened me. And, so the question of evil was always kind of, oddly enough, in the back of my head. And my mother, had experiences, and she married several times. I had several stepfathers, and I would, and as I said, we were a very religious household, and we had a long line of Christian ministers in the background on both sides of the family. So, one was Baptist, the other Methodist. I had landed on the Methodist side. And, I read the Bible at a very early age, and I thought that it was really, this is supposed to be the good book. What are you talking about? And of course, even at that point, I didn't understand what some of the euphemisms that they use in the Bible were, but now I know what they are, and it's even more horrifying. And I'm talking about the Old Testament here. So here they're teaching this, and then I'm seeing this, and this was the big thing for me always. I would hear what people told me, and then I would observe. And I'd say, what they're saying is not what I'm seeing. Why? What's the problem here? If you're saying, and I would even say this as a child to like my grandmother, my grandfather, well, they all talk about love and so forth, but then they do this and this and this. That doesn't make sense because they're lying. That really bothered me. But I did try to conform at a certain point after high school and college, and then I had my first child, and at that point I really tried to conform because I had a little person I was responsible for, and I knew I needed to conform more closely and get a real job, make real money, live a real life, all of these normal things, because it was important, to provide a stable foundation for children. So I really tried, and, I was going along pretty good until, I still had all these questions, and I still had this furious interest in the occult, what you would call the occult. The paranormal is actually a better word for it. So I was interested in the paranormal, and there was an old gentleman who lived not far from us when I was growing up, 13, 14 years old. And he had the entire collection of the proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research from the UK, from back in the the 19th century, right up to when they stopped producing, if they did. And I had access to this, and I read this stuff, and I read, and I read, and I read, and I read, and then he had a small library of other paranormal things. This was his mother's interest, and she had died and left him all these books. And I read all of these things, so I had this tremendous interest. And I learned to do hypnotherapy, when I was in college. Experimented with that, past life regression. There was a lot of things going on. It's not like I just went, boom. But when I had my child, I decided I got to be normal. That's good enough for, when you're on your own and you don't have anybody to answer to. But now you got to get normal here because you got this kid. You got to be straight and narrow. So I tried, and it lasted until. And I've told this story many times. I don't know, I had maybe 3 children at the time. I had 5, by the way, not 4. And believe me, it makes a difference. So my ex-husband had a friend whose father was an Army major, retired. And this old gentleman died, and his friend came to take care of the estate. And he came by our house, and he had a trunk in the back of his truck, and he said, I'm taking care of all Dad's stuff so Mom can sell the house. And this was a trunk full of books. He says, and I know your wife likes to read, so here I thought she'd like these books. Go through them. If she doesn't want them, she can give them away, if there's anything she wants to read. And in that trunk of books, I found the book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, by Gary Allen. I don't know if you're familiar with that book.
No, but the word conspiracy, wow.
And I picked it up, and it was basically about, government conspiracies to do things, political or, how we were run by a bunch of conspirators, how the government was corrupt and they were doing all these things. I mean, you'd have to look at it. And I read this book.
What was the year about?
Probably about 1984, 85, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
And it just blew my mind. I said, what in the world? And it staggered me. Because here they were saying that our government was a bunch of corrupt criminals, essentially. And everything, the wars were started to make money. The World War II itself, and my father, two of my uncles were in World War II. It even referenced World War I and these things. And I thought, my uncle's life was destroyed by World War II. My grandfather's life was destroyed by World War I. And they're saying that all of that was just to feed the greed and money hunger for a bunch of, basically evil people. And that all of these things about patriotism and how they stir it up in people with parades and flags and all this kind of stuff, that it's all a plot to enslave people. And, those kinds of things were basically what he was talking about in this book. And I was thinking, my God, can that possibly be true? Because it shocked me. It really, it's like kind of thing. Because, patriotic, all this kind of stuff. And I said, can it possibly be true? And that's kind of what got the thing going on that line. To find out what I could about all of these things. And this was not the time of the internet either. At the same time, I was also doing a lot of research on health issues because my daughter, my second daughter, had, they diagnosed her with being hyperactive, what they called it in those days, and they wanted to drug her with, barbiturates. And I decided, I'm not going to drug my child. Hell, I didn't even give my children vaccines, And so I'm not going to give her drugs. So I went to the public library and looked, for things on that topic. And I found a book, talked about food additives and that sort of thing causing children to be hyperactive. So that started me on that line. So that's always running in the background. And the political thing was running in the background, and I started getting a little bit involved. I was always reading the news, reading the paper. I would write letters to the editors, and sometimes they would publish my letters. I would write letters to the governor. I wrote letters to the president. I would write letters to senators. Here's what's wrong, blah, 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 blah. There would be problems with the school system. There would be problems with the welfare system. I worked for the state welfare system at one point. And that was another place where what they were saying in the newspapers and talking about welfare fraud and all that stuff was not what I was seeing in my office, you see. So, I saw that the only welfare fraud that was really going on was people at the top levels, who at particular case, they stole the plates to print food stamps, sold them on a black market, for 10 cents on the dollar, billions of them. but the people were coming in and sitting across my desk from me, really needed help, and it was very difficult to give it to them, and it was very stingy help. And I was there during the transition between the what was it, Reagan and Carter. The Reagan administration, was very strict, and then Carter came in. All these, new issues came down. We had a manual for how to do things, about this thick. And then as soon as the Carter administration came in, we get a new manual that's this thick. All the rules are different now. You do everything different. So it was crazy. So I was doing all of that research, and then of course the event happened when I had my my fourth child, and I was laid up in bed. And that was when I subscribed to the ARE's library by mail. And then, you get a catalog, all these esoteric books. I mean, God, I was in hog heaven. So I was sending for books, and I was reading and taking notes and reading and taking notes like a madwoman. And that was when the whole channeling thing started. What I thought was, because I would start, asking these questions, well, what does that mean? Or how could that be possible? Any kind of question you ask yourself when you're reading something, and all of this stuff would start coming into my head, But, yeah, that was kind of where it went and how it got going, and it just kept going from there. And then after we had our channeling experiment, which I've described in great detail in several books, and I ended up divorcing my husband because he couldn't handle the changes. He couldn't, he just couldn't go there.
This is, I think, a common thing if one person is making major developments. It's a minority of partners who can go the distance.
Yeah, so anyhow, I ended up married to my present husband, and we sat down and talked about it one day, because at this point I had started sharing this information with people. And the reason I shared was because I wanted feedback. Because I had learned already at this point in time that you can't necessarily trust your own mind. And I learned that from doing hypnotherapy and, just basically interacting with people myself and talking, to various people. And there's a whole story in itself how I came to that realization that you can't trust your own mind. You need feedback. You need other people to look at something and tell you what they see, because what they see may be different from what you see, and they may see things you can't see. And I learned, really the hard way that you can't see everything.
Including channeling. I'm agreeing with you that you may channel things that are not accurate, that do not go with somebody else's view of things.
Right. So I needed somebody to look at this. So I was sharing it with people, and we had quite a group that would meet once a week for that. And then I started transcribing things and putting them up online, because by this time, this was 97, 98, the internet had come into being. It was still not fully fledged, but it was up and running. And we created a website, and we had it, and that's when the attack began. Because it seems that what you just said, my channeling doesn't agree with somebody else's. Well, it seems that all the somebody else's who my channeling didn't agree with wanted to attack. And they weren't the only ones. I mean, it was a whole lot of the new agey types who were all into channeling, and they were channeling basically what amounted to love and light. And everything is beautiful in its own way, and the Galactic Federation is here to save us, and all the aliens are good, everything's wonderful, and blah, blah, blah. And my channeling wasn't saying that. And so the New Age went after me, and of course Christians, forget that, channeling, work of the devil. And naturally, since my channeling went into some areas of science, then, the scientific materialist types, so basically I was still an outsider completely. And that got pretty intense there for a while. And that was one of the things that led to me really and I was still doing hypnotherapy at the time, and ended up doing some really unpleasant, hair-raising exorcisms
In yourself or in other people?
for other people. You know, that, I mean, when you have somebody under hypnosis and you basically you open them up and something else looks out at you, what are you gonna do? Eh. So yeah, that was pretty scary. And I decided, well, you know, I really need to understand this because I still was having trouble after all those years of all the things I'd learned, you know, about political shenanigans and, you know, social shenanigans. And, you know, it all just looks like, you know, people are just greedy and they get the love of the dollar gets to them. And that's all, you know, basically all it is to it. And but I realized that there's something else. There's something else going on here, especially after this whole attacking mechanism went into play, because it was like a dance, and I watched it like a dance. There were people who were like the ringleaders, people who were the cheerleaders, people who were the, you know, oh well, I don't know if what you're saying is exactly, you know, let's ask, and then you know, then the people that would shout them down. And then they would, you know, get into the, you know, so it was like watching a choreographed dance to see how these groups of people, and this was all taking place on the internet, on discussion groups and discussion forums, to watch how they were leading or pushing or bullying or, you know, any number of things you could use to describe social behavior in these groups. And I started really, really studying it, and I kept reading and reading. And of course, I came across the problem of psychopathy, because it seemed to me that there was something wrong with some of these people. There was, and the other thing that was really apparent was they were all pretty much the same. They may have had different words and different agendas, but their patterns of behavior were like almost identical, and they weren't very creative, but they were very confident. And it was their confidence that amazed me, because, you know, I was not terribly confident about anything. I want people to, you know, look at this with me and let's talk about it and come to a conclusion. And I want, you know, feedback, and I want more data, you know, because I don't want to say something that's wrong. I don't want to say something that's hurtful. I don't want to say something that takes people in the wrong direction. But these people were absolutely confident, and I was watching these absolutely confident people who were lying through their teeth with such confidence. I couldn't imagine, how can a person do that? But it's a tendency of everyone to project their own inner state on other people. And since I couldn't imagine feeling that kind of confidence if I didn't know something for sure, or if there was something that was not true, I couldn't imagine how they could do it, you know? So I had to really, really get into it. So I studied the psychopathy, and I started writing about it. Of course, I was concerned about it in terms of social interactions. And then the more obvious thing that came along was the appearance of, by this time I had a lot of psychopathy studies under my belt. You know, I studied psychopathy for 10 years. I mean, just concentrated. And
I have a question, and that is, there's psychopathy, deliberate evil, you know, with total confidence and saying it as if truth. I have also met, especially in the New Age movement, people who seem to be totally deluded. Like they really believe in the love and the light and the blah, blah, and it makes no sense. It's totally disconnected from reality. How do you see it? I mean, there can be a psychopath behind them, feeding them, but they do not seem, to me, psychopathic. They seem very, very dangerous. I mean, I see the whole New Age movement is extremely dangerous, but I would really be fascinated with your take on psychopathy and the New Age movement.
Well, there's certainly a lot of it, because psychopaths look for any kind of environment where they can become an authority, take charge, and fleece people of whatever they can fleece them of, whether they want adulation, which partly they want, which whether they want, if narcissism goes with it, and they want money, or they want goods, or they want services, but mostly they want power over other people. And that's why it's a tricky thing, because there's a type of psychopath that uses pity to acquire power. Mm-hmm. And they seem so pitiful and not confident, you see. But by doing these pity ploys, they gain power over other people, and have all these people, dancing to their tune, serving them and doing all this sort of thing. So that's a particular type of psychopath. But yeah, and as to could you tell the difference? Probably not. How do you know they're not psychopaths? Because the psychopath, that's the one thing that Hervey Cleckley brought, really sharply to our attention, was their mask of sanity. They seem more normal than normal itself. They are more real than we are. They have, charm. They have the gift of gab, of conversation. They have, abilities to do things that make you feel confidence in them, to say the right thing at the right time. This is if they're putting their attention on something. It slips, obviously, from time to time. But there are so many people who are like that, who you'd never know it unless you lived with them inside the house. And even in that case, and that's why I studied it so long, even women who have been married to them for years and years and years aren't aware until somehow, and in these particular cases, something happens and something gets exposed, and then a whole, complete other life is revealed. And they have spent their whole life living behind this mask. And even their wife and their children aren't aware. And then something happens. And how many of them do it all their lives and nobody ever becomes aware? They just die, and people think they were the greatest things in sliced bread. Meanwhile, they had this whole other secret, filthy, disgusting life that they were living, on the side, or in pockets of time that they took out from their main life. So when you say, so-and-so is, a new age guru, and they seem so they don't seem like a psychopath, so what's behind them? Could a psychopath be? If they're the one in charge, they're probably the psychopath. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's there are people who are manipulated. There are people who've been brainwashed. There are people who've been mind programmed. It's a smorgasbord of all kinds of things, and you can't make a determination quickly. You have to gather data. You have to look into backgrounds. That's one of the things that Hare and Babiak did when they were doing their books, Snakes in Suits. It wasn't enough to just question the individual or to do a background check on them, which they would do, and they would search into their background, documents, public records, types of things, doctors' medical records, even psychiatric records if they could get them. And they would also go around and in the company that they work for and talk to people, to get them off and ask them about this person. And they would collect all of these profiles of the individual from many, many different people. And that's one really good way in a work environment to figure out who the psychopath is and what kind of trouble he's causing. But honestly, it's very difficult with some of the really good ones, and there are some really good ones. But yes, they look into the new age organizations for places where they can plant themselves and grow all their little mushrooms all around them. Doctors, lawyers, psychiatrists, mainly politicians is one of the biggest ones, and that's why it's the way it is, because we have a political system that is such that it rewards this type of thing. It rewards what they do, the kinds of behaviors they exhibit. I mean, if Congress people, House representatives, or in the Senate, if they were limited to short terms, if they were required to live on the same, the median salary of their constituents, if they didn't have all the different perks, if those were closed off to them, if they, basically were contained so that the only thing that could entice them to go into government service would be government service, then, the whole thing would change really, really, really fast. The, government laws, everything would change really, really fast. But because it is the way it is, they get into power. They can be influential to pass a bill that favors this person or that person, so that person is going to give them a kickback. They keep raising their salaries. They have special benefits, special insurance. They have a very large amount of money that they get, for their living expenses when they're in Washington Congress. They can get reelected year after year after year, so they can get scams going that they keep going for, 25, 35, 45, 50 years. Lobbying, special interests, access, to important people. It's designed to attract psychopaths.
Absolutely. I want to know, somewhere in there, it was bad enough for you that you left the United States. So at one point you were working in the United States, you were working for the government, you saw how, the difference between reality and what you were dealing with. But at some point, with what you were talking about, not just reading, the attacks became enough. For example, with you, I didn't know what country you were living in, and I won't say it now, but it's not the USA.
No.
So you left and you did not come back.
No. Yeah, my husband was working for, a subcontractor for DARPA. And he was working on nuclear detection devices. And looking back now, I can see that these were the kinds of things that they were looking already to put into place prior to 9/11, when they started getting all of these devices that you have to pass through in airports, because it was similar to that. Only this was a handheld device, and it actually worked. And it was not invasive and all that kind of stuff, and it detected the elements that needed to be detected without displaying the person's body. But of course, they went for the one that displays the body because that's more humiliating to the individual. So, yeah, he was there, and we didn't like it because we could feel the war drums going in the background, and he didn't want to be giving his time, creative energy, and that sort of thing to things that would be used in any type of military context. And we were also having this terrible time with all these people attacking, because at this point I was writing articles about noticing the similarities between the diagnosis of psychopathy and people in government. And I was recording the words they were saying from one day to the next, as it was reported on television or the newspapers, and then pointing out how they said something else in another place, in another context, on another day, how everything just was so bizarre. And I was even analyzing their speech, because that's a big part of the study of psychopathy, is speech analysis. Because they do use words in very particular ways, because your words represent or reflect the landscape of your mind. And whatever is most prominent in your mind, or however your mind is wired to work, will come out in your speech. And they will give themselves away to a great extent in their speech. And this is something that Hare writes about in his book Without Conscience, and he gives some small examples. There's a lot more literature on that subject, technical papers that have been written about, the specific way that they use pronouns, or their time references. Their time references are particularly interesting, because it seems that they don't have a very good grasp of time. And this is one of the reasons I think the ones who are more successful may have a better ability to deal with time, but they don't seem to have the idea of consequences. Really, it doesn't, stick with them. So they don't see that doing this now will lead to that later. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big problems, actually, I think, with what's going on today, because these people in power who are doing the things they are doing and claiming the things they are claiming do not realize the consequences of their actions. They don't. All they see is their immediate benefit, whatever it is, their immediate acquisition, whatever it happens to be. That's what they see, and they don't really understand the implication of the consequences that will inevitably. Historical research will show you this is what's going to happen. History does repeat itself. I mean, maybe not exactly, but it repeats itself. You do this, this happens. They do not see it. And that's why it's really, really frightening, because you can't understand why are they doing what they're doing, because it leads to these bad consequences. And they've been doing that for a long time, and that's why we're in the state of bad consequences that we are in today. It's really, really terrible out there, and I mean, I keep track of it. I spend several hours a day, seeing what's going on. It's terrible.
I have another question then. I totally see what you're saying in terms of people employed by big pharma, people in the government, people in the media, no seeing consequences. On the other hand, what is happening, I also see, is done by people who see the consequences. Not these people, not the person who's reporting a lie on the media and knows that they're blah, blah, blah. They're doing it because now they're a media star, because now they're a newscaster, or whatever it happens to be. Or, their pharma company has made $72 billion last year. Fine. But from everything I have read, and I am not an expert, but I am, like you, a questioner, I keep hearing about that there are definite long-term plans in place so that these people that you're talking about are not the top people. They are excellent people for carrying out someone else's long-term plan. Would that be something that goes with your thinking as well?
Well,
or your observations? You might know more.
Clearly there are long-term goals, because bringing us to this point has apparently, based on all the research I've done and based on things that have come through in our channeling experiment, is planned. Mm-hmm. This chaos was planned.
Yes.
And the individuals carrying it out are carrying out the wishes of who? Mm-hmm. And I followed this trail, this line of thinking some years ago, and I followed it. It may even have been back as early as 1999, 2000. I was thinking about this. And I followed every paper trail I could find. And you come across all these different kinds of, these esoteric conspiracies. You read through that. You read about the protocols of Zion and go through that. Read about, the people who they're kind of like whistleblowers or whatever, that they found out something and then they write a book about it. And they all have like pieces, but who the heck is behind it? Mm-hmm. And I thought about it. Now, psychopaths and other pathological types, they generally function in an economic kind of way. It's cost benefit. How much is this going to cost? How much is going to benefit me right now? No. And I can't see them thinking about making the world a certain way for their offspring, their descendants. Because what they are actually doing is making things worse for their offspring and their descendants. People like Bill Gates, he has children. He is creating a world that his children probably won't survive in, or his grandchildren. And the same thing for many of these people in government. They are doing things in the world that are probably going to devour their children and grandchildren. See? So, obviously they're not thinking about it that way. So somebody is behind it who is wanting this to be the way it is, who is not concerned about that. And that was when I came to the conclusion that the only explanation for this long-term planning, and we're talking about multi-millennia, not just the last 50 years. This is a repeating thing, was that there must be beings, entities, individuals who we are not aware of, generally, who have a vested interest in Earth being brought to this state at this time. And, the most common thing that people say is they call them like aliens. Well, we don't call them aliens anymore. We call them like ultra-terrestrials. There is something else that lives on this planet, or inside this planet, or around this planet, and it may be only a dimension away, but it's in charge. And Jacques Vallée called it, the control system, that there was some kind of intelligence. And there's been enough research done on this, to raise the hair on the back of your head, get out the hairspray today, and to just generally indicate that this is, in fact, the case. We are at the mercy of beings that do not have our best interests at heart. And that's really where you get to the bottom line. And if you read my series, The Wave, where I write about all of this, it's like 8 volumes. I lay it out in exquisite detail. And then the volume High Strangeness, which is just, kind of focusing on this whole alien abduction phenomena, to show that this is something that's not just, some guys coming from outer space. And then, so I'm laying all of that out there. And it just seems self-evident once you get all of the pieces that there is something that has this aim. And it's directing, and it's global, and it's directing people globally. Because now, like our channeling source said, that World War II was a trial run, a practice run for what's happening to us today. And that's really kind of a horrifying thing for them, but they said it was going to be global today. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
That is my sense as well. Not exactly who, what. I have less of a knowledge of that. And for myself, I never see more than one step. And so my next step that came to me on like the 3rd of April or the 2nd, the day before my father's birthday, who is dead, was to do the Truth Summit. I don't know if it can do something, because my thing is always, things are not only about knowledge for me, nor do I think it's only like, hey, I know this, I want to show off my knowledge for you at all. It has to do with much more than, it has to do with expressing what you've learned through channeling, through research, but it has to do in some way with connecting with the world. And in some way, if we know this, what can we do with it? So,
well, I'll tell you, I don't know if you are familiar with what they call the normalcy bias.
Yes, I am.
Well, they've done research, and they say that in a terrible situation like a tornado is coming, or in a plane crash, and those were the examples that were specifically used in the book. God, I wish I could remember the name of the book. Can you hold on just a second, and I will tell you.
Sure.
I I have the name of the book written. You Are Not So Smart. That's the name of the book, and it's by David McRaney. And they talk about the tendency to flounder in the face of danger, and they call it negative panic. Anyway, the whole thing about it is that in any dire situation, about 75% of the people succumb to this panic. And about 15% on the other end of this bell curve or this scale, are reduced to blithering idiots. There's because they can't handle it. And at the other end, there are people who can do something. And the people, it turns out, who are able to do something in these crisis situations are people who have thought about it. Are not maybe specifically this situation, but crisis situations in general, have thought and have interacted with people who have experienced it, have discussed it, have some idea that that there is these terrible things, and that you may need to do something to survive. You may need to act. You may need to act instantly. You may need to, at that point, lose your concern about what people are going to think of you and do what has to be done because it's the right thing to do. There's about 15% of people who can do that. And we are seeing this all around us. Because people are warning. People are warning. This is coming. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. And 75% of the people are not doing anything. And 75% of the people are probably gonna, I would say 75% is how many took that COVID vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
I think I read a statistic, something like that, like 75% of the planet's population took the COVID vaccine. That's just nuts. So, survivors of any dreadful situation generally have thought about dreadful situations. They have, and here we're talking specifically about evil.
Mm-hmm.
Surviving evil. And I think the analogy can be transferred to surviving evil. Mm-hmm. Because if you see that you're confronted with evil on a global scale or on a national scale, it's in the House of Representatives, it's in the Senate, it's in the White House, and you need to do something. You shouldn't be sitting there freezing because, that freeze response is natural. People freeze in the face of a crisis or a terrible situation because they just can't do otherwise. It's ingrained. It's hereditary. It's what they call evolutionary. The freeze response. That's why a deer freezes in the headlight when you're coming at him with a car. It's like, that's what people are doing. They're going, ugh. And you go on Twitter and every day, day after day, arrest Biden, arrest Hunter Biden, arrest Hillary Clinton, arrest Bill Clinton, arrest Barack Obama, arrest George Bush, on and on and on, the kind of the figureheads of the systemic evil. There's a whole slew of them in Congress and in the Senate. And a whole slew of them on the local level and local governments, because, when those kind of people get in power, they tend to start doing favors for people who are like them. Mm-hmm. They get them jobs. And over a period of, say, 50 years after, these kinds of people have taken control, probably every important position in every government office or every corporate office has been filled by somebody who has pathological tendencies. Mm-hmm. We are faced with a huge systemic evil that is so overwhelming, and yet, at the same time, when you think about it, it's still a small percentage of the population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The people at the top, it's a very small percentage.
That is why I think that the percentages are not accurate to and there are always people on borders between one group and another group. And that's where I see people like us coming in, that they're people at the borders who might move from one group to another. Somebody put together 12 rules for survival in extreme situations, and I forget the name, but rule number 1 is perceive and believe. So the 75% who are going, arrest Trudeau, arrest Biden, they're like stuck on like hamsters on a wheel, as opposed to what can I do right now locally here. It's also what can somebody else do, because they're not arresting Biden. So they're stuck on something that I see totally unproductive. So the thing is, how many of those are movable in some ways, so that, because the figures aren't absolutely 75%, etc.
So what do you think they should do?
What do I think, find something local to do. Like, I'm doing this. It's not about arresting Trudeau or something. So what it does is it gets more people to become somewhat aware.
Yeah, it gets the awareness out. That's what I'm doing, and I've always known that that's the kind of thing I can do. Come on, I'm 72.
And then I talk to people, but I will throw it back to you, because you may be way ahead of me on this. I said I'm a next step person. Oh, you're looking like I don't know all the answers either. No. God, but it's just like, if we just know.
If I were younger, I would do differently, obviously. I mean, like I just said, I'm 71 years old. I have still some research work that needs to be done before I check out, so I need to be getting about that. Because there is, read my book From Paul to Mark, and you'll understand. But ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, historically speaking, it's going to come to extreme violence. And what worries me about that is whenever that happens, it's usually like the pendulum swinging the other way, and it just gets bad in another way. Look at the French Revolution. Look at all the important, valuable people, minds that they executed that they shouldn't have. Innocent people, how immediately the idea of chopping people's heads off, appealed to the psychopaths and says, yeah, let's do that. And here, I got a list of people I want you to chop their heads off because I can, take their...
my enemies. Time to get my revenge.
Yeah, so, that kind of thing always results in just not the right thing to do, and then it restarts everything on a wrong foundation. So, if there were someone who could control this needed movement, who could encompass it, who could direct it, and who was not himself a pathological individual, that would be something that might turn things around, because we're basically trying to turn an ocean line around.
Yes.
And they're not easy to turn around. They don't turn around fast. And, there is no one.
That's the one thing I cannot accept, that there is no one. It doesn't seem plausible to me.
Have you seen anybody?
No, just a moment. Laura, that I have not seen anybody does not prove nobody exists. So my sense is that I don't know that person. As far as possible, in my itsy way, I try to be such a person for people around me.
I'm talking about big scale.
I know you're talking about in a way, way larger scale, in a way, way larger place.
Donald Trump, he's kind of interesting. He's done some interesting things, but he's a businessman, and he's got a certain agenda. He's got a certain focus, but he's not going to fix everything.
No,
and they're not
I
going to
don't
look.
know. I do not know. What I do hold out hope for or belief in is that there is a possibility. So that's the one thing is I don't know who that person is, but I believe it is possible that that person exists.
Yeah, and like you said, the local level. If you go out on the local level and you talk to people and you get people together, have meetings, talk about things, at least you're talking about the evil and making it evident to people and making them aware so that if something really dramatic happens, they'll at least be ready to not be the deer in the headlights. Now's the moment to take action, and they'll know it.
That to me is something. And
Yeah, and we have our forum. We've got
mm-hmm,
multiple thousands of members. Constant discussions on everything. My husband's got a blog. We have our Signs of the Times website. I don't know if you've been there, but that's been our kind of our focus for a lot of time is to get the news, present the news, and truthify it.
mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've read it or not, but you just go to SOTT.net.
Yes, I know it. I
Yeah,
found a lot of things there.
yeah. So we just take the mainstream news.
Mm-hmm,
And a lot of news that we get from alternative sources and even from individuals around the
mm-hmm,
world, it's all kind of mixed together, but, kind of juxtaposing it together so that people can see what the real deal is, or as close to the real deal as we can get at the
mm-hmm.
moment, because sometimes you can't get any further than a certain distance knowing what's going on because so much is hidden. Um, but we try to do that, and we have a lot of readers there, and then we have our forum. We just spend our time really working on trying to spread information and knowledge and doing the research so that we have it to give to other people. Because like I was going to tell you a while back, back when we started our website, my husband and I sat down and we talked about it, and he says, well, we have found each other, and what brought us together was our search for truth.
Mm-hmm.
Seeking for truth and our love of truth. And he says, what if there aren't any others? And I sat there and I thought about that real possibility because basically in my whole life, up to that point, I was 44 years old. I had not encountered somebody who felt the same way about truth that I did. Of all my acquaintances, all my associates, people I'd worked with, nobody felt the way about it that I did, that it was like a passion. And I looked at him and I says, well, if it's just you and me, then it's just you and me. We keep on doing it. We just keep on doing it because it deserves to be done. The universe deserves it. I mean, it would be a shame for the universe to end and nobody to have existed who loved truth and tried their hardest, the impossible dream, I feel like singing a song here.
Go ahead. Music is great.
Who actually dedicated their lives to finding the truth and propagating the truth and sharing it with as many people as possible. And actually, in a sense, doing that is like putting out, a meal and seeing, who wants to come, who's really hungry. Because if there are other people who want truth, then you attract them, and then because we wanted to meet others who cared too. And of course we did. We have. There are many. We have a wonderful group on our forum, and they, it's been really worth the pain and the suffering.
I think that's amazing. And if you look at what you've done, it's not 2 people now. How many thousand? You said on SOTNet?
We have thousands on our forum. I don't even know the number of readers of SOTNet.
Mm-hmm.
Thousands, and we have meetings. We help people get together. We curate everything so that we can help people to get together and meet safely because we are aware of pathological individuals trying to infiltrate groups and create problems or prey on people. So we try to to, manage that so that people can actually get together in real life safely. So we do that a great deal. And so that's what we're doing, and that's what we will continue to do. And as far as, I think that people should just be getting together and talking about it. And I hesitate to say anything more than that, because, the right person with the right idea will find the right group of people, and they'll know what to do, I guess, is the best way to say it. Because
I want to thank you for talking to me. I've really appreciated your story, and so I want to thank you. And do you have any last words to people, any advice, ideas, anything at all?
well, I think you just said it. Somebody who has an example, who sets an example of continuing on doing what is right, what is the thing to do in the face of everybody being against you. That's never been something that has stopped me. The fact that people have been against me, it has, in fact, it fuels me. Because if I've done the research and I am sure of my position, as sure as I can be, and I will always qualify it and say I've done the research and I'm sure of this position as far as it can be determined. But because I don't do the whole psychopathic this is the way it is, that sort of thing. No, people should just keep doing and practicing and learning, because you don't want to be the deer caught in the headlights, and that's what happens to 75% of people. The odds are not good. So people need to make sure that they are not included in that 75% grouping. Become aware. That's the main thing. Become aware. And the only way you can do that is with knowledge. And the only way knowledge grows is with truth. That's the bottom line. Yeah.
I agree with you, and thank you ever so much.
You are welcome, and I thank you for calling me.
Well, when I came across you, I really believe in following a trail. And I came across you, I went, whoa, double interest, both in her own journey and then that you were willing to deal with underlying evil in terms of getting us to understand what is going on. Not in terms of having the answers, but in terms of being willing to ask the question and being willing to look.
Yeah. Well, your interest in Islam is curious. I think you really might enjoy reading my book, From Paul to Mark, because, if there was no Jesus as he was presented, then there is no Islam. And
what is the book?
It's called From Paul to Mark.
From Paul to Mark. Right, I read about that book because I read about all the books you've written and stuff like that.
That one is probably my masterpiece, and it's on Amazon, and the work of several other scholars has basically undercut the whole Old Testament story as well. So once you take away the Old Testament and the way the New Testament is put together, then it takes away Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Et voilà.
It doesn't mean there's not spirituality. It doesn't mean there's not God. It doesn't mean that it does. And I'm careful to navigate that in this book.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those other things are like, in fact, I think the religions in their manifestations are there because there is spirituality, and because there is, I call it cosmic energy or cosmic energies, or you can call it whatever you like. But it's because that exists and because there is our capacity to connect with it. That's why we have religion. That's my understanding.
Well, I think I found pretty good evidence, and I put it all in the book and explained everything, that there was a real reason for the beginning of Christianity. And Paul was the one who basically began Christianity. and that the Gospel of Mark was written to explicate Paul's teachings, and the people who came along later mistook this metaphorical story for the truth. Okay.